namesake of Streeterville is Captain George Wellington Streeter.
He was an eccentric character. Cap Streeter runs his boat aground in 1886, July 10th of 1886 to be exact, and they think it is at the corner of Superior and Fairbanks. He decided to just live on his boat since he didn't have means to actually buy property at that point, but he encouraged the contractors who were rebuilding after the Chicago fire to dump their rubble into the lake. He would even charge them for doing that.
Streeter's looking at a map and he's on land that isn't in any map. So he claimed it. He called it the District of Michigan, and he was the governor. And he sold plots of land for $1.
There was 186 acres that was not within the city limits. So Cap Streeter did not feel that he had to follow the city laws. So when the city of Chicago would say you can't sell alcohol on Sundays, Cap Streeter would do that because he didn't have to follow their rules.
The neighbors on Pine Street, which was now becoming a very nice neighborhood, are looking across the road and see this terribleness going up in front of them.
There was a huge battle constantly between the Potter Palmers and the Fairbankses who thought that they owned the property due to riparian rights, but Cap Streeter really felt it was his. Chicago Dock and Canal was like the key company that owned everything down in South Streeterville. They were the main player, they owned all the property. And being at the mouth of the Chicago River and the lakefront, it is like the best location in the whole city of Chicago.
It was formed by the first mayor of the city of Chicago, William Ogden, in 1857. And the story is, Ogden was a lawyer, and he was from the East, and he was sent out here to liquidate some holdings that people he represented had. And he got here and said, wait, instead of getting out of this, we should be getting in. And so he acquired the properties from those clients, joined forces with neighboring property owners, and created the Chicago Dock and Canal Company. His lawyer in that process was Abraham Lincoln.
William B. Ogden really understood commerce and creating an economic viable area.
He began to develop it as a commercial shipping warehouse district. He built Ogden Slip, which is a finger of water that provided shipping access to North Pier Terminal, which he also built. North Pier was a huge warehouse complex built in the late 1800s that survives today.
It really was a huge building. People don't realize it actually used to extend east of Lakeshore Drive all the way over to Navy Pier, and then it extended west actually over to Columbus Drive. And it was the longest building probably in the city by far. It was a bonded warehouse, and ships could pull into the Ogden Slip, and it was pretty tight, and unload on the south side of the North Pier building. And then on the north side, there was a railroad track that used to come over to Navy Pier, and it brought paper to the Tribune and the Sun-Times in those days, and then it came over and it serviced the North Pier building.
Many people may not even now remember the time that the tunnel system in Chicago flooded. Those tunnels that flooded and caused all that damage when they were penetrated up by the merchandise mart, those tunnels begin here. Those tunnels were built initially to take merchandise that came in on the Ogden Slip, was loaded into North Pier when it was a bonded warehouse, and then taken into the lower levels, loaded on carts that then used those rail systems and tunnels to distribute those goods throughout the city.
Ogden foresaw how important the railroad was. So we actually had a rail line right down Illinois Street that went west. So with all the warehouses and all the shipping, they could put all their wares on the rail line and ship them out. So it was just the center of commerce at that time.
Navy Pier was originally envisioned by Daniel Burnham in his 1909 plan for Chicago. His vision, though, was that there would be 5 piers along Chicago's lakefront. And the only one that was ever built was our Navy Pier. It opened in 1916 as Municipal Pier number 2 and has served many purposes over the years, but it opened as the largest pier in the world, which it still is today, and its purpose was the combination of shipping and recreation.
This area was the busiest shipping port in the whole world in the late 1800s, and then shipping actually ended up moving a little further south to the Calumet, and then the South Streeterville area became all factories.
The dock and canal property had this eclectic mix of uses historically. There was a sugar refiner purportedly owned by the Marcos family from the Philippines. Kraft Food had their headquarters here. Lindsay Light manufactured the gas mantles for gas lights throughout Chicago and probably throughout the Midwest. You had the Baby Ruth Candy Manufacturing Company, a tire recycler.
The fundamental thing that happened with the entire Chicago dock, Streeterville neighborhood, and the North Pier building was they had all been long-term 99-year industrial leases, and they all came up and expired back in the 70s and 80s. Then all the land could be repurposed into residential or other uses.
The construction of Lake Point Tower in 1968 was the first major construction in the area. There was a large development east of Lakeshore Drive, and there was opposition at that point. The whole idea of saving the lakefront came into being. The city worked on the Chicago Lakefront Protection Ordinance, which was enacted in 1973. And the Lakefront Protection Ordinance actually had a lot of influence on the redevelopment of this area here.
The long-term vision that Ogden had, that in 100 years we'll redevelop this depending on what is around and what's going to be, and came to fruition. And the families at the time didn't really have real estate development expertise. So they went looking to hire somebody who might have had some ability in that area. And I was fortunate enough to have been found, recruited, among others, and hired in 1981.
Charlie Gardner was the first president of Chicago Dock and Canal outside of the Ogden family in 140 years, which is just amazing. When Charlie came in, he started a lot of the development in the neighborhood. A lot of the factories moved out, and it was all just vacant lots everywhere, just seas of parking lots, they used to call it. Even Cirque du Soleil used to have their circus tents in the area, so that's how empty this area was. Granted, we had Navy Pier, but that had its own life as well.
In those early days, most of this was empty lots. There were 2 or 3 hospitals. There was some manufacturing here. There was a candy factory here, a folding carton business here.
It really took 2 things to make the land and area become more valuable. First was the expiration of a lot of those long-term ground leases. And then finally the S-curve was straightened out and a number of access changes were made to make it more development-oriented. And then we saw a bigger trend, a bigger interest in urban development across the country, and this area had the characteristics of many of the other places that were underutilized land across the country that eventually became developed.
The other thing that really helped our development was the extension of Columbus Drive north from Illinois Center. In the late 70s, there was no Columbus Avenue Bridge. Columbus ended at Wacker, and then Fairbanks started at Illinois. And the city realized they needed that north-south connection and actually bought some of our land and built the Columbus Drive extension. And that, again, opened up all the land east of Columbus. We knew we had to create developable parcels, between Columbus and what is now McClurg. We also knew we needed to extend McClurg south from Grand to provide an entry to the property from the north. So it made a lot of sense to truncate. I can't remember whether North Pier at the time had already been truncated or whether we did it, but in any event, we put McClurg right next to North Pier and we truncated Ogden Slip, filled it in from what is now the east side of McClurg to about Columbus Drive.
Ogden Slip is the only privately owned waterway in the city of Chicago. And so you had legislation and zoning to put in place to protect that, but still leave it open for commerce. I was involved in the original redevelopment of the North Pier building, and at the time, the fact that you could have a private dock with access to the Chicago River, an active transient dock with entertainment, with outdoor seating, with bars, restaurant, that was really very pioneering for Chicago. That was not present any other place at the time.
Back in the early 1980s, we at the planning department, were hearing that there's potential redevelopment of this parcel. We were approached by the trust. What was decided is to start off with development guidelines. The city had all the experience from Illinois Center south of the river in the 1970s, what to do, what not to do with a large parcel of land. Just rethinking of how this large parcel of land could be developed, really, starting from scratch with very little on it, was actually precedent setting.
A very important aspect of this all was working with the city to determine the density, the number of units you could build here, the size of the buildings. All of that had to be negotiated, planned, shown, and get approved.
Generally, the city was very cooperative. I mean, they wanted to see the property developed. They wanted to get more property taxes. They were worried about traffic and congestion, parking. So, they knew what they were doing. My one huge disappointment was that we didn't get city money to do any of the infrastructure. We did it all. The city knew damn well that the shares are trading at such and such a price and that people who have that much money invested are gonna do what it takes to build it out.
This actually was a very short planning process, about 18 months from the time it was determined that there would need to be development guidelines through the plan development approval process. There were several stages and steps that were created. It was a relatively quick process, and the alderman was skeptical about some things and raised questions, but between the alderman, the commissioner, the mayor, community groups, it was an unprecedented public-private partnership. One that I really had never seen before.
SOAR, the Streeterville Organization of Active Residents, has been the voice of the residential community. We deal with traffic, with preservation, with the architecture, with open space and parks, and really looks at how the neighborhood, all the land use and development that is going on. So we are able to meet with the developers, meet with the aldermen, meet with the planning department and the Department of Transportation and talk about what do we need and what do we want as a residential community in the area.
During my time as president of SOAR, I dealt regularly with Alderman Nateris. And you would expect there'd be a little tension there. We'd ask him to do something and sometimes he would, sometimes he wouldn't. So there's always that, that lobbying campaign where the community would try to put pressure on their elected official. And now that I'm an alderman myself, I look back on those years and I have a new appreciation for what Alderman Nateris went through. He was one of the longest serving aldermen in the city of Chicago, 36 years in the city council. And so he was in the chair making the decisions for redevelopment in Streeterville for the bulk of that time. And I would say by and large, the decisions that he made turned out to be the right decisions. He really did have the best interest of the community at heart. He tried to strike that balance with promoting economic growth and protecting and preserving the existing character of the neighborhood. Not an easy task.
I think the entitlement process in Streeterville is a challenging one, but one that in the end ends up in the best product being built. Because you have such an educated constituent base here and a very intelligent entity like SOAR that you end up working with, you get great ideas. You get ideas like not having parking above ground if you can help it, and designing beautiful buildings. And so that process can be long and involved, but at the end, the result is better.
I think the uniqueness of Plan Development 368 is the specificity, getting into the detail, the types of pavement materials, the type of building materials. What was not wanted are painted concrete structures, large parking garages with open air views of the parked cars, ground floors with blank walls. Some of the lessons learned from past experiences.
In 1985, we got that plan approved in what in Chicago was known as the Plan Unit Development Ordinance, which specifically provided for the development of the entire property under the plan. I knew we needed our own master planner. We hired Dirk Lohan, who's the grandson of Mies van der Rohe, had his own firm and the successor firm from Mies, and Dirk created the detailed plan for the development of our parcels of land. He designed the walkways and the drives and Ogden Plaza.
There was a lot of thought given to connecting the open spaces, having the River Esplanade going from Michigan Avenue all the way to Navy Pier, and having a series of other public spaces along the way that are different and that would serve the potential uses around them.
There were some very pioneering zoning and planning and design elements that came into effect. I believe it might have been one of the first PUDs in the city that really made active use of different trade-offs and different allowances for different type of development based on existing versus future. It was one of the few that came up with view corridors and other open space requirements. You have a unique situation here.
As part of the master plan, I might say, for our portion, the idea was to create these individual building sites and have, I think it's 4 or 5, basically public spaces. On the west end was Ogden Plaza, which is there today, and a nice front door to the Sheraton, and now to the Lowe's and to the new building that's being built on Illinois. Riverwalk was a second major public area that we early on bought into as important for the city and for our site to maintain that as a public access area all the way to the east end. The third one was DuSable Park, land east of Lakeshore Drive, which Chicago Dock owned, 3 acres, and committed to have it be a public park. We dedicated to the Park District and asked that they name it DuSable Park in memory of Jean-Baptiste DuSable, who helped found the city. The fourth public space is Ogden Slip, where we created the promenade on the south side of North Pier Terminal, adjacent to the slip, and a walkway on the south side of the slip, adjacent to what is now the townhome site.
One of the biggest things that I think put this on the map was the development of the Sheraton Hotel. That was really the first big major new construction project that came into this area. And it was, by all accounts, very pioneering. I think in many people's eyes, it was still somewhat of an undiscovered asset. And once that Sheraton Hotel opened, along with the underground parking deck and some of the other public amenities, the Riverwalk, people began to wake up to the potential of the area.
The first thing we realized that, again, we were an island or isolated, and we had to convince people they weren't going to be living in the middle of a construction zone forever and ever. And so that's why we went ahead and put all the streets and sidewalks and pavers and design features and riverwalk areas in early.
When you talk about Continental Divide, you think of mountains. But right a little west of here is a Continental Divide. All the water flows into the Great Lakes Basin or away from here into the Mississippi Valley. That's a Continental Divide. But it's not visible because there are no mountains. It's just very flat, subtle. And now, by doing what we did here, by putting the locks at the end of the river on Lake Michigan, this area here has become so to say, a continental divide, because this water flows into the Mississippi, while that water out there flows down the St. Lawrence River into the Atlantic Ocean. The fountain symbolizes that, in that on top of the circle is where the water, when it rains, comes down. Then it flows over into 4 levels on the west side and into 4 levels on the east side. That's the Continental Divide. The water flows this way and that way over the Great Lakes and then into the ocean in the Atlantic. And on the west side, the water flows to certain rivers, the Chicago River, Des Plaines River, Illinois River, and Mississippi River into the Gulf of Mexico, which then is co-joined with the Atlantic Ocean again. So that's the inspiration behind this design. The other point of the water fountain arch was to be a welcoming arch from Lake Michigan into the river. When we come by boat into the river, we need to be welcomed too.
We went through a lull in the early 90s. Real estate was tough, and we eventually decided that, you know, we're kind of stuck here in a tough landscape. Maybe we should think a little more about the interior of our site. It was originally zoned for like 10 or 12 story buildings the height of North Pier. And the one thing that was being built in Chicago at the time was townhomes. And I kind of said to my architect friends and my board, you know, one of the greatest streets in the city of Chicago is Astor Street. And it's a block off Lakeshore Drive, and it's low-rise. And it's right behind a bunch of high-rises on Lakeshore Drive. Do you think we could create something like that here? And in fact, that was the genesis of this 56-unit townhome complex that is east of McClure Court and north of Water Street. I think we all got tired of being a public company, being scrutinized for quarterly dividends and reports and progress, you know, in a long-term business on a short-term basis, and decided to put the company up for sale. And we got a lot of interest.
When the board of directors of the company decided to make it, the whole company available because they didn't want to do any more development, then I was attracted to be one of the original bidders. Lehman Brothers out of New York held an auction for all the shares to be purchased and tendered, and then the company to be taken private.
When Dan took it over, there was no development north of Illinois. There was the Kraft building, which had been a long-term, which was built in like 1920s. North Pier was here. The townhomes had started, but weren't there yet. And everything along the river and next to Lakeshore Drive were still vacant.
In the original planning that Equitable and Chicago Dock did, they visualized it to be more of an office development. My vision was it was going to be primarily residential with a bunch of retail and commercial to make it a real neighborhood. So we went ahead with primarily residential buildings, although the first large building, which was one of the largest built here in many years, was the 2 million square foot AMC movie theater building.
When we started doing due diligence, we found that we had thorium, which is an issue underneath a lot of sites in Streeterville.
Lindsay Light Company in the early 1900s made street lamps for all of the city. And a byproduct of their work was we now know to be a radioactive material called thorium. They were creating this waste material on our property as our tenant.
A contamination problem of pretty epic proportions with a chemical that is radioactive and deemed at some level dangerous by the EPA. Not that it's uncontrollable, but still an issue.
Fortunately for us, we learned that Kerr McGee a major oil manufacturer and energy producer in Oklahoma had acquired Lindsay Light. And Haremski is a Fortune 500 company and had a lot of money. And I just called them up and said, we have a problem. Long story short, I said, we don't know what it's going to cost, but if you'll pick up 90% of the cost, we'll pay 10.
There was a sharing agreement that the Chicago Dock and Canal, through negotiations that Charlie Gardner completed, that was in place before we actually closed on the transaction. Ultimately, we worked diligently with the EPA, with Haremski Chemical, to come up with a plan and strategy that would really take care of that contamination on the site.
I first came to Streeterville in the late 90s, and I would say at the time it was roughly at the halfway point of its transition from an underused industrial area, with environmental issues and smokestack industries, and really not someplace people would ever consider living.
This was the first time that the city of Chicago actually proposed a new change in zoning to the area that was not owner-sponsored. It was sponsored by the city to downzone the area and put in effect some other requirements.
When you have a redevelopment project like what took place in Streeterville, where the existing zoning was obsolete and needed to be changed, that's when the aldermanic prerogative really kicks in, and the aldermen have a tremendous amount of influence over what will or will not be built. It's a great responsibility. I feel the burden of that every day because there's always competing interests.
There was flexibility into the plans where you can amend the plan development. And there have been several amendments over the years to allow certain developments to change the uses, to change the densities, to move densities around.
As part of kicking the neighborhood off, I mentioned the 850 new units that we were building, but the building that we're sitting in right now, 440 and 480 North McClurg, was a rental building, and we decided to convert that immediately to condominiums to bring in owners that would take pride in living in the neighborhood.
What I noticed in the early days of those developments is, particularly in the case of Riverview condominiums, you were footsteps from the river. You were footsteps from Lake Michigan. You were close to Navy Pier. You were a couple blocks from Michigan Avenue. But when you got there and you were in that little isolated area, it was very quiet and very serene, and you do felt like it was a bit of an oasis in the city with access to everything you'd want in just a few steps.
Coming up with the plan that we have here, which allows for so much open space and for a real nice, beautiful open space and the pathway to get from Ohio Street to Grand Avenue. We didn't have much opposition to it. All of our developments, we try to be responsible to the neighborhood. If you look from Columbus all the way down to almost Lakeshore Drive, we've had 541 Fairbanks we own, we built Streeter and Streeter Place, and now Moment and Sienna. And when we did Moment, we really spent a lot of time trying to distinguish it from Streeter and Streeter Place. These were sister buildings, they were built in phases, but are always planned to be similar buildings, similar architecture. At Moment, we wanted it to be totally different. We didn't want people to think it's anything like Streeter or Streeter Place, and I think we did a successful job in that. We bought the Tribune property with CIM out of Los Angeles, our partner we've done many deals here in Chicago with. Again, our plans are, we're going to convert the building into condos and retail, make a whole new presence. So we're really excited about it.
There were still a lot of important decisions that needed to be made as far as land use, zoning, infrastructure, transit, and of course the economic factors were playing a part in all of that, and then city politics were playing a part in all that. So you really had all the ingredients that make it an interesting case study in urban redevelopment were right there. And I was just very excited to play at the time a small part in it, and it led to a higher level of visibility for me, which when I decided to run for alderman, people knew who I was in the neighborhood. It really helped.
One of the things we said to Alderman Nateris, this is back in probably 2003 is, Alderman, we need a neighborhood plan. We have a lot of open space. We have a lot of things that are just happening, developments that are going on. We really need a plan for the whole area. So he gave us a green marker for creating green space and a red marker for other development sites.
They don't make money on a park. They don't make money on open space. They make money on redevelopment of taking open space like a surface parking lot and building something high and tall and dense on it. So the economic pressure is there. The only way to balance that out is with political pressure. It's with organized neighbors getting together and fighting for open space.
With 400 Lakeshore Drive, we will continue the north side of the Riverwalk, and then on the east end, we will finish that. So that Riverwalk will continue past our site and our new buildings, underneath Lakeshore Drive, and into the new DeSable Park. As a part of us finishing 400 Lakeshore Drive, we will complete that park. So that's a 3-acre park surrounded by water on 3 sides, kind of looking out at Navy Pier and at the water, and it will be, again, another incredible green space that no other neighborhood in Chicago has a special place like that right in its front door.
It would definitely stand out in the skyline. It would have been Chicago's tallest building. That project stopped along with several other projects that had canceled their development plans. Now finally we're seeing some condo buildings come back into the picture, but nothing that would ever be as dramatic as having a 2,000-foot building. Our goal is still to make Streeterville the best neighborhood in Chicago, but it's going to have a very different look than what it would have had if things would not have changed in 2008. Lee Golub with Golub & Companies, who built Streeter and Streeter Place, they built a little park in between the 2 buildings, and then they put a statue of Cap Streeter next to it. That little park, along with the statue of Cap Streeter, means so much to the community. You walk by, you've got outdoor seating out there for the restaurants that are there. It's an active, interesting, fun place to walk. Seeing the statue of Cap Streeter brings back the whole history of the neighborhood. Some people will tell me how they will go out of their way to walk by Cap Streeter just to see him and his dog Spot.
It's just gratifying that really after 20 years, there's really, every single site is done now with the exception of the Spire site.
It's kind of interesting. When Cap Streeter was here, you could buy a lot for $1. Now it's the most expensive property in the city of Chicago. And it's a beautiful community. I love living down here.
We found the anchor when we were excavating for the Parkview project across the street from us back in 2006. When we hit the virgin sand or sand throughout the project, we knew there was a beachfront there. And back in the 1800s, that's where the actual shoreline of Lake Michigan was. And about 35 feet down, we pulled up this anchor. We pulled it out, and as the chain followed it, we knew we had something on the hook there. We knew since Cap Streeter was part of this neighborhood, we knew, and we all felt that it was part of his boat. We felt that it was an important part of the history of Streeterville. And to us, it's an artifact. It's a historical piece of memorabilia out of Streeterville. And we were all very excited to see a product like this come out of one of our excavations.
Luckily for us, the neighbors of Streeterville, especially some of the longtime residents who were here, years before, things started to change the way they have been lately. The old timers that tell the stories were well aware of the history of this neighborhood, and we have such a colorful history. The legendary figure Cap Streeter and all the lore about him. It's really the residents, and in conjunction with the neighborhood organization SOAR, that drew a hard line and said, not only are we going to protect our legacy here, but we're going to make sure that we use it going forward to promote that unique identity of this neighborhood, that we have something special to tell in the history of Chicago. We have a narrative, we have a story that many neighborhoods don't have. Today, if you see the famous statue of Cap Streeter, which was designed by a noted artist and naturalist, Dennis Downs, new residents to the neighborhood who see that and they might pause and say, well, what is this? And that's their introduction, to the history of this neighborhood and to the fascinating story behind it, which I think is more widely known today than it was, even 10 years ago. because the story has been retold as part of Streeterville's rebirth. And it's such a fun and unique story, and it gives us flavor. I even had the privilege of playing Cap Streeter himself at the unveiling of the Cap Streeter statue.
When we finished this property over here with all this open space, Gail actually approached me again and said, what about if we did something over here, a statue over here? And I think her and her husband, Dennis Downs, who is the sculptor of Captain Streeter, we got behind it. We said, that's a great idea. And so we spent the money, we engaged Dennis to do it, and this is the result. And it was, I think, the first piece of public art in Streeterville.
When Lee asked me to research the project, I read every book on the man, tried to get every old tin type there was, and somewhere in the middle of what some people perceive as a charlatan and other people may perceive as a businessman, we tried to come in the middle with presenting Cap as what you see today, the namesake of Streeterville.
Everyone that's here, and especially all of the individuals that were interviewed and made this film possible. The response from all of you immediately was really overwhelming for the film, and don't think we don't appreciate that. So the goal of our film, Gail and I wanted to make sure that we recorded the individuals who actually had something to do with making Streeterville, Streeterville.
So happy to have so many of them here tonight along with their guests. So that's great. And we also want to thank some of our sponsors that helped fund this project. So thank you to all of them. We couldn't do it without you. So we really appreciate it. So we do have one person in particular that we would really like to recognize this evening, who has, through all of the years, has been a very important figure in our neighborhood. And that is Charlie Gardner. Charlie Gardner So Charlie Gardner was the president of Chicago Dock and Canal Trust, who owned all the land down here for 140 years, from 1857 until 1997 when Dan McLean took over. So thank you, Dan. And then he hired me. And that's so we would like to present Charlie Gardner for all his years of contribution to Streeterville, really making a difference here in the neighborhood. We would like to present him with our Cap Streeter Award. It's a bronze sculpture of Cap Streeter himself. So thank you, Charlie. No slapping tonight. Thank you, Charlie, for everything you have done. Okay, Thank you so much.
Now I'd like to introduce a good friend, a great person, a great individual who's done a lot for the Streeterville community. And by that, over 2 decades of work helping to keep Streeterville what it is today for all of us. And that man, like I said before, also our good friend, is Alderman Brian Hopkins. We'd like to say a few words.
Thank you, Dennis, and congratulations, Charlie. We learn in school that history is about the past, but it really isn't. As we get older, we realize history is very much about the present. Moments like this, we're sharing our collective history. We're bringing it to life. And we're doing so because it's important to us, the stories, the legacy, the things we've done, the things that those who came before us have done. It's all very alive in this moment of sharing. And we in Streeterville are so fortunate to be from a community that has such a rich and colorful history. And in the relating of those tales over the centuries now, they really come to life. And they come to life because we continue to breathe life into them in moments like this one where we're going to see this film tonight. I'm so excited about this, and I'm so excited that I was a part of it. And Gail and Dennis, thank you so much for your leadership. I'll return the compliment to both of you that what you guys have meant to this community over the years just simply cannot be measured. A big round of applause. I'm excited tonight to be making my big screen debut. And, I do hope that the next time when we do the sequel, I can do it in costume as Cap Streeter because I still have my top hat in the closet. Have me back for the sequel, Dennis.
And Brian plays a wicked Captain Streeter.
Enjoy the film, everyone.
Thank you.
All right, thank you, Brian.
So, Janet, be honest, I know you know me. What was your reaction to it?
Well, first of all, to see the history from the beginning until what it has and is becoming is amazing. I mean, so many Chicagoans who even live down in this area have no idea of what really happened. They might know Streeterville, they might know Cap Streeter, but they don't know the true development history and how exceptional it was in terms of other parts of the city don't have this history.
Thank you.
That's true.
Thanks so
I'm
much.
glad you
Good to see
liked
you.
it. We're
All
really
right.
happy to have you.
I loved it.
This is Jeannie Martini working at the Tribune Tower project, and I have to, and Rob Martini, her husband, and I have to say that they know me, but I'm still going to ask them their gut reaction to the movie that they just saw on the history of South Streeterville. So, from your heart.
So well done. I mean, I really needed to know all of that, and it was amazing. I mean, way bigger than my expectations. So well done. As usual, Dennis and Gail hit it out of the park.
Yes, Dennis and Gail, an absolutely fascinating story, well presented. Love the part about the Continental Divide by Mies van der Rohe's grandson, the architecture, the planning, Brian Hopkins, Dennis and Gail, just they need to be congratulated. Very professional, very informative, and very interesting from the beginning to the end. Absolutely fascinating. Wait 1 second.
Of course, how you doing? Good to see you.
Good to see you. Would you mind just still standing there?
Where?
Let me take my jacket back off. So, yes, I don't mind standing. We're with Lee. Obviously, Lee's in the film, but this is Scott Pepper and his wife Annie. Obviously, another family that's had a lot to do with projects of great magnitude and culturally important in our area. But I have to admit, I know Scott. We've been friends for a couple of decades, but I still want to ask him,
because I have to know. What did you think of the film? I thought it was awesome. I thought it was fantastic. I learned a lot today. It was unbelievable. And how you weeded in and out, old aldermen, new aldermen, where the vision was going and everything else. I thought that was fantastic. That was really awesome. Really well done.
Good to hear from
another company.
You want to ask me? From another company that actually did something. Lee, what was your reaction?
I thought it was so well done. I mean, the history, the progression of it, and having Charlie's background was, you know, I knew most of it, but I'd forgotten a lot of it. And the whole history and the way you guys put it together was fantastic. It was really, really well done.
I know we know each other, and I've been, you know, a tiny part of what you do. But after making the film, I'd like your opinion because you're a big part of the community. Sure. What was your gut reaction to the film?
Well, I think you did a fantastic job the way you put the whole thing together. And what I would say is that by taking the time to look back at the past, you are really telling us about who we are now and what to expect in the future. So it was such a nice way to put everything together, and we are really looking forward to see how the rest of Streeterville is going to continue to develop over time. But you gave us such a great idea with this documentary, so congratulations again.
I appreciate that.
Yes.
Andrew and I collaborated on projects. Just so you know that Andrew actually knows me, but I still want to ask him what his opinion of our film was that we just did tonight.
Academy Award material. I have to say.
All right, that's over the top.
Yeah, but it was terrific. I got inspired looking at it. I love documentaries. You really brought history into it. You brought it up to the present day. I felt a connection with everything that was going on there. And another part is just seeing how recent a lot of this development was.
I don't think people understand that. And we wanted them to understand it and see the men that actually, and the women that actually made our neighborhood what it is today. How cool, because otherwise that'll be gone, they'll be gone, and we'll get someone else's opinion.
Yes.
It was so neat to have all of these men and women here that were in it tonight. And I appreciate that you liked it.
It was wonderful, wonderful. Hats off to you. That's great.
Appreciate it.
That are down here in the reserve section. So it's really nice that they have come, and a number of people have actually come back for a second time. And so we're really glad that you've been, you know, that you enjoyed it so much the first time you wanted to come back. You know, anytime you want to see a movie for the second time, you always gotta like, you know, it's cool that you liked it that much. So we are thrilled to have everyone. And at our premiere, I just wanted to, we had acknowledged one very important person in the neighborhood who has made such a difference through all the years. His name is Charlie Gardner. And Charlie was president of Chicago Dock and Canal. You will see him in the film. He has a starring role. And Charlie, there's Charlie. So Chicago Dock and Canal was here for 140 years, and Charlie, he was not president for the 140 years, but he was president for a significant amount of time of it, and he was the only president outside of the Ogden family in that 140 years, and we just think that is just so neat, and it is so special to have him here, but also to have him a neighbor in Cityview, actually, where several of us live. So at the premiere, we gave Charlie, we awarded him a bronze sculpture of Cap Streeter, so he has been sporting that a bit around the neighborhood. So that was just a treat to have you accept the award and to be acknowledged, and we really acknowledge you and thank you for everything you have done. Thanks.
That's a really heavy bronze statue.
Yeah.
Anywhere up there past the third level.
John Ryle.
Another family that's basically an institution in the Streeterville area, and its development is Gollop and Company. And I'm really happy tonight to have Lee Gollop and his father, Gene, Will you please stand up, gentlemen? I'm with Gene Gollop, the founder of Gollop & Company, and I just like your honest opinion of what you saw tonight.
I thought it was terrific. It really brought a lot of memories back for me, because I remember meeting Charlie Gardner, you know, when he first came here, and was introduced to him by a New York broker called Matt Stakem. And we took a shot at trying to do something with Charlie at that time, which we weren't successful at, but eventually actually did things around it with the projects that we did.
Absolutely.
So, you know, I'm really proud of my son, who really is.
I think the whole neighborhood is.
Led the charge and made things happen.
Absolutely.
It does to this day. So it's really terrific. It's very, very, very heartful for me.
We were just happy you could be part of this presentation.
Thank you. Thank you.
Again, it's good seeing you again.
Bye. Thank you.
This is Edzer Cantav, President of DuSable Heritage Association and also Secretary of DuSable Public Advisory Council. And this is where I met, I worked with Gail. And Gail is a member of the DuSable Park Advisory Council. And so I can tell, this is a fabulous project, you know, and you can tell it's a labor of love. You know, I mean, Dennis and Gail and all those wonderful contributors, they did a wonderful job. And I don't know how long it took you to do this.
3 years.
3 years. Oh my goodness.
And then re-edited it 11 times.
And but it's a work well done, and I'm very proud to be in attendance today.
Sense of Bert.
It was
those pictures.
I knew you'd appreciated it.
Loved it.
And we were editing. We re-edited that part and re-edited that part.
And the one morning that we had it all set up for his interview, and he couldn't make it that morning, Gail and I were at his house and asking for him.
Yes. And I'm glad you made it, Dave.
Thank you for calling.
And he just he got sick that morning, or he would have actually done his own live interview for this whole documentary for Bert Nataris.
We actually tried even to get
me
him
too
into another one.
Oh, you did?
Yeah, we reached out to him. Sometimes that just didn't work. But the fun part was at least we got his presence and his attitude.
Absolutely.
And Brian did a nice job of talking about him.
He did a great job.
He did. All the people.
That was
whoever
very nice.
Knew him knew that he did a great job. He had a lot to do with our neighborhood.
Big time.
Mike?
Yes.
What was your affiliation with the Aldermen, and what did you think about the movie?
So I thought it was fantastic. Bert was, I met him at Pete's on Kingsbury about seven years before he died. And I go, hi, good morning. And he goes, I don't know you. And I said, okay, sir, I just wanted to say good morning. At Pete's Coffee, I went back in line to get my coffee. He taps me on the shoulder and he goes, all right, come on, sit down with me and tell me what you're all about and what you're doing here. So we were friends. I met him over at Pete's probably 100 times after that. We got to be great friends. He told me stories about the history of his experiences as an alderman throughout Chicago. We talked about Gail. We talked about Dennis and how all the different experiences, interactions that he had. He was a great character, and he really cared about Chicago.
You could tell that everyone said that. We were really glad we couldn't get him, like I said, and because of health issues, and he was getting up in age.
Yeah.
But we weren't going to do the movie without having him credited for what he did for the community.
Yeah, that was big time.
It's good seeing you. I'm glad
Great
you made
seeing
it.
you. Yes.
Absolutely glad.
Great to be here.
So, I'm with John Ward, and I'd like to. John had a lot to do with promoting plays, underwriting things for the history of Streeterville, and I'd just like to get your opinion of what you saw tonight.
I think we saw living history. I think we saw people inspired by what history can mean and how it can create, foundations, roots, pride, community. I couldn't be prouder to be a part of the Streeterville community.
Can you tell me what your wife's title is right now and what she felt about the movie? She was here with you tonight.
My wife Gail, who's a lifelong Chicago Public School teacher, principal, director for many years, and is now very much involved in the Chicago History Museum. And so she has this enthusiasm to see the best of what we saw tonight, together with the best that the museum can do, come to fruition together. And I think this video is going to live at that history museum in a beautiful, permanent, and visible way.
That was actually one of Gail and it was our goal. That when we got done showing it, that's where we want its home to be.
Could be its home.
And all the other interviews, you got to remember, those are hour to hour and a half interviews by each one of those men. So and we have that film, and we were planning on giving that to the museum. So when young people research these individuals, they can see a lot of information, not just the several minutes that they were on screen tonight, but they can actually learn, again, from the people that actually made Streeterville what we have tonight.
But beyond providing the information, which obviously that does, I think you really get the feeling for how history can strengthen a community.
Yeah.
I mean, the community's satisfaction, enthusiasm, it was just
it's a positive thing.
It's a very positive thing.
And we need positive things these days.
We do. Congratulations.
So, I appreciate it. So glad you were here.
So glad I was here.
And so glad you underwrote one of the Cap Streeter plays as well. Sure.
Wow. So we're on the west side.
Thank you.
And you made a big difference in it.
Couldn't be prouder.
Good.
So those Super
Coming
Bowl
from you, I take that as a
pictures
compliment.
didn't come off from when we did the first Streeter.
What do you think?
Yeah, so Malik Abdul Samad. I've actually been living in the neighborhood for 10 years now. I moved here in August of 2012, and I've been involved with the Streeterville Organization of Active Residents and worked with Dennis and Gail for many years. So, and I work in real estate here. So I knew a lot about the history of Streeterville through the years. I've heard a lot about this story. But what was really incredible about the movie here is the details of how things happened, the sequence of events and how this transformed from industrial all the way to the early development and then to what it is today. And also, it's like so incredible to hear it from the people that lived it and that made it happen, And they tell you how they envisioned it first and how that vision changed with different from the Chicago Docking Canal to the MCL when they said, oh, it's not an office development, our vision, it's more of a residential neighborhood. So hearing this from these people, from the key stakeholders, I think was an incredible experience. I cannot recommend it any higher.
Well, I'm really glad you got to see it.
Yeah.
I appreciate you being here.